In the high-flying world of CSS, one thing we can all agree on is that far too many things happen. Each day the sun rises and we peel ourselves out of bed, just trying to remember all the things that happened the day before, only to be forced to drink from the firehouse of happening things all over again. So, what the hell even happened this year? The State of CSS, an annual developer survey, just published its findings. The opening section is all about the demographics. The word is demographics of the survey respondents. There are a few interesting findings around salary. First, as you might expect, geography plays a huge role. If you spend time in online developer communities, like me, you've probably seen people talking about eye-popping salaries and acting like everyone has them. This is a good reminder that outside the US, very few developers earn $100,000+ every single year. This pair of charts highlights it even further. In the US, 64% of the respondents earn over $100,000 every single year, or even more, but in the rest of the world that number is only around 14%. Interestingly, the next two countries with the highest salaries are Canada and Australia. Canada makes sense, it shares time zones and a border with the US, so plenty of Canadians work remotely for US companies. They're pretty smart actually. Australia is on the other side of the world though, so maybe Australian companies pay really well? I think we found a glitch in the matrix. Interestingly, the next two countries with the highest salaries, this is the paragraph I just read, excuse me. Either way, these results reinforce something important. If your goal is to earn a lot of money as a software developer and you don't live in the US, your best bet is to work remotely for a US company. The survey results include lots of cross tabs, breaking down salary by other variables. For the most part, they match expectations. For example, salary tends to increase pretty dramatically with experience, who could have thought? Depressingly, there is a stark wage gap between male and female survey respondents. Before we dive into this next chapter, let me quickly turn my page with one hand, because I'm not able to otherwise perform the video. If you identify as a male and have a female coworker or coworkers, see if there's a wage gap at your office and advocate for equal pay. Of course, randomly DMing your coworkers with, hey, my salary is X dollars would be a bit weird. And you definitely shouldn't ask your female coworkers what their salary is. If you find out that your coworkers aren't being paid as much as you are, please advocate for them with your manager. It's, real talk, so much more powerful when coming from someone else. It's easy to dismiss someone raising concerns about their own salary, because who wouldn't want more money? Let's talk about some JavaScript, CSS stuff. Cascading style sheets. Let's talk about some CSS stuff. The State of CSS's format is to present the participant with a CSS feature and to ask whether they've used it or not. They can also optionally express a sentiment. Amazing! If they've tried it, they can specify whether they liked it or not. If they haven't, they can specify whether they're interested or not. One of the most widely used modern CSS features is the has pseudoclass. 73% of developers have used it and people seem pretty happy with it. Rather than highlight the popular features though, it would be more valuable to showcase some of the underrated features, the so-called hidden gems. For example, text wrap pretty. This feature has only been used by a quarter of survey respondents, but it's so handy. Trust me. It lets us avoid orphans, words that sit alone on the final line of a paragraph. With text wrapped pretty, it will ensure that the final line of text has at least 2 words and shift things around so that the entire paragraph feels more balanced. Avoiding orphans is the most obvious thing this property does, but really it's a whole separate algorithm for managing line wrapping, and it generally produces much more pleasant results. Another underappreciated feature is the ability to change the color space used for gradient interpolation. What a fancy word. Only around 1 in 10 developers have taken advantage of this. This feature can transform the washed out gradients like this one into this one. Amazing, isn't it? Back in the good old days, we had to manually calculate the stops using JavaScript. Now we can do it with this handy new syntax. Next up, the prefers reduced motion media query. Only about 44% of developers have used it. This feature is essential when doing any sort of animation that involves motion to make to make sure we aren't causing problems for folks who have vestibular issues. Finally, there's backdrop filter. This property isn't exactly obscure, but almost 40% of developers have never used it in their entire lives. I cannot believe it. Yay. It's similar to the filter property, except instead of applying the filter to the element itself, it applies it to everything behind the element. This allows us to create frosted glass effects like you see on the fancy new websites kids build these days. I thought this joke was funny. Let's keep going. So the big story with CSS libraries over the past few years has been Tailwind. Tailwind CSS! Yay! Though the community has been wondering for a few years what Tailwind's ceiling is. Dun dun dun. Let's see what we can learn from this year's survey results. 75% usage seems like a lot, but this isn't the full story yet. Notice the 50% in the bottom left corner. That's the percentage of survey respondents who answered this question. So in terms of total usage, it's 37.5%. 75% of the 50% of respondents who answered this question. How does it compare to previous years? It's tricky. The survey format changed between this year and previous years. The closest value able to be found is that 37.4% of survey respondents used Tailwind in 2023, but we should be skeptical of this number. There is a typo in the script, I cannot believe it. We should be skeptical of this number since a much larger percentage of respondents answered this question, 74% compared to only 50%. Nevertheless, whether it's plateaued or still growing, it's clear that Tailwind isn't going away anyway, anytime soon. Okay, some of the community's favorite ways to write CSS is with the styled interface provided in libraries like Style Components, Emotion, and Pandas CSS. And this year's results are super interesting. Style Components continues to be one of the most popular options, only slightly behind CSS modules with 59% usage. Only 36% of respondents answered this question, but that makes sense to me given that these tools are React specific and this is a survey about CSS and not React. Yeah, the next part of the survey looks at how developers use CSS. Look at this graph. It is pretty surprising. Apparently 1/3 of survey respondents don't test their work on mobile. This is kind of baffling. Most internet traffic these days is mobile. So I don't know how you avoid testing on mobile, actually. What are you doing? It's a little disheartening to see how few developers test the accessibility of their work. 28% test using keyboard navigation on desktop, 27% test using dev tools like AXE, haven't used this one to be honest, excuse me. And only 19% test using screen readers. Shout out to you, lads. Maybe the question was phrased in a way that some people didn't understand. Hopefully, all of these numbers are higher in the real world. Now finally, there's this graph. This one makes me happy. So many people have been working on CSS over the past few years, from specification authors to browser engineers. Thank you, and thank God that you guys exist. You're real chads. It feels like our community is really appreciating those efforts. They better do. With surveys like this, it's always important to keep in mind that we are not seeing the whole picture. Most developers don't hang out in online developer communities at all and have no idea that this survey exists. So we should be careful not to put too much faith into these results. Well, that does it for me, but nevertheless, that was just the tip of the iceberg. See you soon.